They say the demon in the dungeon hasn't eaten in 3 days. They say his howls shake the fortress walls at midnight. They say anyone who looks into his eyes goes mad. But they don't say why I'm the only one brave enough, or foolish enough, to feed him. Ironhold Fortress stood as humanity's final stronghold against the darkness that lurked beyond its walls. It was a monument of stone and iron, built centuries ago when the war between humans and werewolves raged across the land like wildfire. Though the age of open warfare had ended, replaced by an uneasy truce built on fear and mutual distrust, the fortress remained vigilant, its soldiers ever watchful for the threat they believed prowled in the shadowed forests beyond. In the deepest chambers of this fortress, where daylight was a forgotten memory and the air hung thick with moisture and hopelessness, there existed containment cells designed specifically to hold creatures of supernatural origin. The cells were constructed of ancient stone reinforced with enchanted iron, and the chains that bound the prisoners were forged with dark magic, cursed metal that not only restrained but actively drained the life force of any creature it touched. It was here, in this place abandoned by compassion and light, that a demon wolf had been imprisoned for nearly 8 months. The wolf was a breathtaking sight, even in his weakened and shackled state. His fur was silver white, luminous even in the oppressive darkness of the dungeons, and his eyes were in piercing ice blue that seemed to glow with an inner fire that refused to be extinguished. He was massive, the size of a warhorse, and despite being restrained and tormented by the purple chains that burned his flesh with cursed lightning, there was something about him that commanded an almost primal reverence. The guards who were forced to venture into the dungeons always did so with barely concealed terror, never approaching closer than absolutely necessary, their hands trembling on their weapons. Nobody in the fortress knew his true identity. To them, he was simply another demon captured during a purge of the forbidden forests, condemned to waste away in chains until death finally claimed him or the cursed burns that never healed consumed him entirely. The fortress warden occasionally spoke of making an example of him, of dragging him into the courtyard and executing him publicly to show all creatures of darkness what awaited those who dared exist in a world that had outlawed magic. But for now, he simply suffered in silence, forgotten by everyone except the one person tasked with keeping him alive. That person was the Lynn Thorne, a young woman of 23 who had been sentenced to work in the fortress dungeons. The Lynn was a prisoner herself, arrested 3 months ago for the crime of stealing bread to feed her dying sister. She had been raised in a small village on the outskirts of the kingdom, the daughter of a seamstress and a woodcutter, both lost to a plague that swept through the region when she was barely 16. She had survived by taking whatever work she could find, always sending what little she earned back to care for her younger sister. When her sister fell ill and the healers demanded payment the Lynn couldn't provide, desperation had driven her to theft. It was a single loaf of bread, but the punishment was severe. The warden had given her a choice: execution, or serve as keeper to the demon wolf in the deepest dungeon, a task everyone knew was a death sentence by another name. The Lynn had chosen survival, clinging to the hope that if she could endure long enough, she might somehow find her way back to her sister. The first time the Lynn descended the winding stone stairs into the dungeons, carrying a wooden tray with stale bread and a cup of murky water, her heart hammered so violently she thought it might burst from her chest. The stories she had heard about demons and cursed wolves since childhood painted them as abominations, soulless monsters who existed only to destroy, creatures without mercy or humanity. But when she reached the cell and saw the being chained within, what flooded through her wasn't fear. It was heartbreak. The wolf lay on the freezing stone floor, the glowing purple chains binding his legs and throat clearly causing him agony. The Lynn could see where the cursed metal touched his skin, leaving burns that crackled with dark energy, wounds that wept but never closed. He was visibly starved, his ribs visible through his magnificent fur, his breathing shallow, and yet his eyes, though dimmed by suffering, still burned with an intensity that spoke of unbroken will. The Lynn approached the iron bars with trembling hands, setting the tray on the ground within his reach, exactly as she had been instructed. The wolf lifted his head slowly to look at her, and for a breathless moment, their eyes locked. The Lynn had expected to see savagery, mindless rage, perhaps even the demonic hunger the priests warned about. But what she saw instead was intelligence, profound and unmistakable, and something that looked heartbreakingly like hope. She backed away quickly, climbing the stairs back to the relative safety of the upper dungeons, her hands still shaking. But the image of those ice-blue eyes haunted her for the rest of the day and into the sleepless night that followed. There was something in them that seemed impossibly human, and that realization unsettled her in ways she couldn't name or understand. The iron shackles bit into Thalin's wrists as the guards dragged her through the corridors of Ironhold Fortress. Her bare feet scraped against the stone floor, leaving bloody smears with each step. The bread she'd stolen, just one moldy loaf for her dying sister, had cost her everything. They threw her into the warden's chamber like a sack of grain. Warden Marissa sat behind her massive desk, her cold gray eyes studying the Lin with the same interest one might show a cockroach before crushing it. The woman's face was all sharp angles and cruel lines, carved from years of dispensing merciless justice. The Lin Thorn, Marissa's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Theft. In my domain, such crimes carry only one sentence. She leaned forward, savoring each word. Death. Thalin's heart hammered against her ribs. Please, I was only trying to. However, the warden continued, raising a pale hand for silence, I find myself in need of assistance. You have a choice, girl. Face the executioner's axe at dawn, or accept a different kind of sentence. The guards flanking the Lin chuckled darkly. Whatever this choice was, they clearly found it amusing. There is a creature in my deepest dungeon, Marissa said, her thin lips curving into something that barely resembled a smile. A demon wolf. The beast requires feeding, and I've grown tired of replacing the servants it kills. You will tend to it, bring it food, water, whatever scraps keep it breathing, until it eventually devours you or you go mad from terror. She tilted her head. Choose wisely. The axe is swift. The demon is not. Thalin's mind raced. Her sister Lyra was dying, wasting away in their tiny cottage while fever consumed her from within. If there was even the smallest chance the Lin could survive long enough to find a way back to her. I'll do it, she whispered. The warden's smile widened. Excellent. Take her below. The descent into the fortress's bowels felt endless. Stone stairs spiraled down into suffocating darkness, lit only by sputtering torches that cast dancing shadows on the damp walls. The air grew thicker with each step, heavy with the stench of decay and something else, something that made Thalin's skin crawl with instinctive dread. At last, they reached the bottom. A single corridor stretched before them, lined with empty cells until it ended at a massive iron door covered in warning symbols and protective wards. The guard shoved a wooden tray into Thalin's hands, stale bread and a cup of murky water, then unlocked the door with trembling fingers. In you go, one muttered, pushing her forward before slamming the door shut behind her. The cell was bathed in an eerie purple glow. And there, in the center of that otherworldly light, lay the most magnificent and terrifying creature the Lin had ever seen. The wolf was massive, easily the size of a warhorse, with silver-white fur that seemed to shimmer despite being matted with dirt and dried blood. But it was the chains that stole her breath. Purple energy crackled along the cursed metal wrapped around his throat, legs, and torso, burning his flesh wherever they touched. The smell of charred skin filled the air. The guard's footsteps echoed up the stairs as they fled, leaving her alone with the demon. The Lin should have run. Should have pounded on the door and begged to be let out. Instead, she found herself stepping closer to the bars, drawn by something she couldn't name. The wolf raised his massive head, and their eyes met. Ice blue. Ancient. Intelligent. And filled with a pain so deep it made Thalin's chest ache. This was no mindless demon. This was someone who was suffering. 7 days passed in the suffocating darkness of the dungeons. 7 days of carrying stale bread and brackish water down those endless stone stairs. 7 days of facing the creature the world called a demon. But the Lin had stopped believing he was a demon on the second day. They're calling you the demon wolf, she said softly, setting the tray within reach of the bars. The massive creature watched her with those piercing ice-blue eyes, never moving until she stepped back. But demons don't wait politely for their meals, do they? The other prisoners, thieves, murderers, rebels rotting in their own cells, cackled at her words. Girls lost her mind, one wheezed from the shadows. Talking to that monster like it's human. The guards weren't much better. Mark my words, Guard Captain Renwick warned as she passed him on the stairs one morning. You're going mad, girl. First you start talking to it, then you'll think it's talking back. That's how the demon's curse works, drives you insane before it kills you. But the Lin saw things they missed. The way the wolf's ears twitched when she spoke, as if he understood every word. The way he never showed aggression toward her, even when hunger made his ribs stark against his matted fur. The way the purple chains flared brighter whenever he tried to shift position, burning deeper into his flesh until he collapsed, panting. Most telling of all was how he watched her. Not with the cold calculation of a predator, but with something that felt almost protective. She discovered just how protective on her 10th night in the dungeons. Guard Henley had been drinking again, she could smell the sour ale on his breath as he stumbled down the stairs behind her. Pretty little thief, he slurred, grabbing her arm as she tried to pass. All alone down here with the monsters. Must get lonely. The Lin tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Please, I need to. You need to be nice to those who can make your life easier, he growled, pressing her against the damp stone wall. The roar that erupted from the wolf's cell shook the entire dungeon. Henley spun around to see the massive creature launching himself at the iron bars with such violent fury that the metal groaned and sparked. The purple chains blazed like lightning, searing into his flesh, but still the wolf fought to reach them. His snarls echoed off the walls like thunder, promising death to anyone who dared harm the girl under his protection. 7 hells, Henley gasped, releasing the Lin and stumbling backward. It's going to break free. He fled up the stairs, his terrified shouts fading into silence. The wolf collapsed, chest heaving, smoke rising from where the chains had burned deeper into his body. Purple blood seeped through his silver fur. Without thinking, the Lin reached through the bars and placed her hand on his massive head. His fur was softer than she'd expected, despite being matted with blood and dirt. Thank you, she whispered. For the first time since she'd met him, those ancient ice-blue eyes softened. The intelligence she'd glimpsed became unmistakable, along with something else, something that looked remarkably like gratitude. In that moment, the Lin knew with absolute certainty, this was no demon. This was someone who had chosen to protect her, even at the cost of his own agony. The Lin couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those ice-blue depths staring back at her, filled with intelligence no beast should possess. The way he'd protected her from Henley, the careful patience with which he waited for her daily visits, none of it made sense if he was truly the mindless demon everyone claimed. 3 weeks into her sentence, desperation drove her to seek answers in the most unlikely place, the other prisoners. Most were worthless, murderers and rebels who spat curses at her passing. But in the furthest cell from the wolf's lair, she found Nessa Emberfell, an ancient woman whose silver hair hung in matted braids down her bent back. Unlike the others, Nessa's eyes held clarity, wisdom that seemed to pierce straight through to Thalin's soul. You want to know about the wolf, Nessa said before the Lin could speak. Her voice carried the rasp of age but also something else, authority. I can smell his blood on your hands, child. You've been tending his wounds. Thalin's breath caught. How did you? I was court healer to the werewolf kingdoms before they branded me a witch and locked me in this hole. Nessa's weathered fingers wrapped around the bars. I know the scent of royal blood. And I know a cursed king when I see one. The words hit the Lin like a physical blow. King? His name is Alaric Ashford, Nessa whispered, glancing around to ensure no guards were near. Last Alpha King of the Silverwood Pack. The most powerful werewolf kingdom that ever existed. Her eyes hardened. Until his most trusted advisor, Lord Morrigan Blackthorn, betrayed him. But he's... The Lin struggled to find words. He's trapped. Those chains are forged from his own blood, mixed with the darkest magic known to our kind. Nessa's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Morrigan used an ancient ritual, stealing Alaric's power to fuel his own rise to the throne. The chains don't just bind, they drain. Every day, they pull more of his strength, his memories, his humanity into Morrigan's hands. Horror crawled up Fallon's spine. Can they be broken? Only one way. Nessa's eyes bored into hers. The curse requires compassion freely given by one who sees the man within the beast. Someone who shows him kindness without knowing his true identity, without hope of reward. She laughed bitterly. Morrigan believed it impossible. Who would show mercy to a chained demon? But Fallon's words died as understanding crashed over her. The chains have been growing dimmer. Nessa nodded grimly. Your compassion weakens them. But child, listen carefully, if you continue this path, Morrigan will sense his magic failing. He'll come for you both, and when he does. She gripped the bars tighter. He will kill you without hesitation. And Alaric will watch, powerless to stop it. Terror and determination warred in Fallon's chest. She thought of her dying sister, of the life she'd hoped to return to. Then she thought of ice blue eyes filled with pain, of a creature who'd chosen to protect her despite his own agony. Thank you, she whispered to Nessa, then turned toward the wolf's cell. Alaric lay in his usual position, watching her approach with that careful intensity. Belin knelt before the bars, her heart hammering. I know who you are, she said quietly. Alaric Ashford. And I'm going to set you free. Those ancient eyes widened, and for the first time since she'd known him, she heard him make a sound, a soft whine that sounded remarkably like relief. Everything changed after that whispered confession. Where once the Lin had simply delivered food and fled, now she lingered. She brought clean water in addition to the brackish mess they provided, using strips torn from her own dress to gently clean the wounds where the cursed chains bit deepest into Alaric's flesh. My sister used to love stories, she murmured one evening, carefully dabbing purple blood from a particularly vicious burn on his neck. I'd make them up when she couldn't sleep. Tales of brave knights and lost kingdoms. Her voice caught. She always asked for the ones where everyone lived happily ever after. Alaric's massive head shifted closer, his breath warm against her fingers. When she looked into his eyes, she saw something that made her chest tight. He was listening to every word, treasuring each piece of herself she shared. Their communication became a language unto itself. When her hands grew numb from the dungeon's bitter cold, he would press closer to the bars, sharing what warmth his body could provide. When she spoke of her fears for her sister, he would gently nudge her hand with his muzzle, a gesture of comfort that spoke louder than any words. And when she told him about her dreams of escaping this place, of seeing green fields and open sky again, his great paw would cover her smaller hand through the bars, as if promising he would help make those dreams reality. The purple chains, she noticed, grew dimmer each day. What had once blazed with violent energy now flickered like dying embers. The burns on his skin began to heal, slowly but unmistakably. You're different. The Lin spun around to find Captain Caspian Greymantle standing at the bottom of the stairs, his weathered face carved from shadows. Unlike the other guards, he didn't reek of fear when he looked at Alaric's cell. Instead, his dark eyes held something far more dangerous, understanding. I've been watching you, girl, Caspian continued, stepping closer. When you first came here, you were terrified. Now. He gestured toward where she knelt beside the bars, her hand still resting near Alaric's paw. Now you tend to him like he's precious to you. Heat flooded Fallon's cheeks. I'm just doing my job. No. Caspian's voice was quiet but certain. You're falling for a monster. No, the Lin said, rising to face him fully. Behind her, she could feel Alaric's tension, the way his muscles coiled as if preparing to defend her even through iron bars. I'm seeing a man everyone else chose to forget. Caspian studied her for a long moment, then glanced at the wolf whose eyes now tracked his every movement with lethal intensity. If that's true, he said finally, then God help you both. Because when they realize what's happening here. He turned toward the stairs, pausing only to add, Morrigan's scouts were seen at the northern border yesterday. Whatever you're planning to do, girl, you'd better do it fast. The sound of his retreating footsteps echoed through the dungeon, leaving the Lin alone with the terrifying certainty that their time was running out. The darkness in the dungeons deepened 3 days later, carrying with it a presence that made even the stones seem to recoil in fear. Lord Morrigan Blackthorn descended the stairs like a shadow-given form, his black robes flowing behind him as he moved with predatory grace toward Alaric's cell. The Lin pressed herself against the far wall, terror freezing her blood. She'd heard whispers of the usurper king, how his eyes burned red in the darkness, how dark magic crackled around his pale fingers like living lightning. But seeing him in person was like staring into the face of death itself. What is this? Morrigan's voice was silk-wrapped around steel as he studied the chains around Alaric's form. The purple glow that had once blazed like fire now barely flickered. My curse weakens. Someone has been interfering. Alaric snarled, low and dangerous, his lips pulling back to reveal fangs that gleamed in the dim light. Even weakened, even chained, he radiated such lethal intent that the temperature in the cell seemed to drop. Morrigan's red eyes swept the dungeon until they landed on the Lin. She tried to shrink further into the shadows, but there was nowhere to hide from that burning gaze. You, he said, tilting his head like a serpent studying prey. The little servant girl. How long have you been tending to my prisoner? I just bring food, the Lin whispered, her voice barely audible. Morrigan stepped closer, and she caught the scent of sulfur and ash clinging to him. No. You've done far more than that. His pale lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it weren't so cold. I can smell your compassion on him. Your kindness. He spat the word like a curse. Guards, he called, his voice echoing through the dungeons. Execute this girl. Now. The command hit Alaric like a physical blow. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the fortress, he launched himself at the bars with such violent fury that the iron groaned and sparked. The chains blazed back to life, searing into his flesh, but still he fought to reach Morrigan, to protect the girl who had shown him mercy. Morrigan raised his hands, dark magic pouring from his fingertips into the cursed chains. Alaric's roar became a scream of agony as the purple fire intensified, burning deeper, hotter, until the smell of charred flesh filled the air. Stop. The Lin threw herself forward, tears streaming down her face. Please, you're killing him. Morrigan's hands stilled, his red eyes widening with dark delight. You care for it, he breathed. How unfortunate. He turned to the guards with renewed purpose. Change of plans. Lock her away. She dies at the next blood moon, 3 nights hence. His smile turned predatory. The same night I permanently seal my dear Alaric's fate. He can watch his little savior die before I drain the last of his power forever. As the guards dragged her away, the Lin heard Alaric's anguished howl echo through the darkness, promising vengeance that might never come. The cell they threw the Lin into was 3 doors down from Alaric's, close enough that she could hear his labored breathing through the stone walls, but too far to see him. The darkness pressed against her like a living thing, thick with the scent of despair and forgotten dreams. She could hear him pacing, or trying to. The chains would flare with purple fire every few steps, and his movements would stop abruptly, followed by a soft whine of pain that made her chest ache. He was calling for her in the only way he could. I'm here, she whispered into the darkness, pressing her face against the cold iron bars. I'm still here. The pacing stopped. In the silence that followed, she could almost feel him listening, desperate for any proof that she was alive, that Morrigan hadn't already carried out his threat. Without thinking, the Lin began to sing. It was the lullaby her sister Lyra had loved, the one that spoke of ancient times when wolves ran free through moonlit forests and humans lived without fear. Her voice, soft and clear, carried through the stone corridors. In the time before the chains were forged, when wolves were kings and hearts were free, the moon sang songs of silver light, and love could break eternity. The response was immediate. Alaric's breathing steadied, and she heard him settling against the bars of his cell, as close to her voice as the cursed chains would allow. The purple glow that seeped through the cracks in the walls flickered, dimming with each verse she sang. This wasn't magic weakening the chains, it was something far more powerful. It was love, pure and genuine, flowing between two souls who had found each other in the darkest place imaginable. Footsteps on the stairs made her song falter. Captain Caspian emerged from the shadows, his weathered face grim in the torchlight. He glanced toward Alaric's cell, where an expectant silence had fallen, then back to the Lin. "I've seen many things in my years guarding this fortress," he said quietly, producing an iron key from beneath his cloak. "But I've never seen anything like what you two share." He slipped the key through her bars. "The blood moon is tomorrow night. If you're going to save him, it has to be then. Morrigan will perform the final ritual at midnight." Thalen's fingers closed around the cold metal. "What will happen when the chains break?" Caspian's expression darkened. "I don't know. He's been bound for so long, trapped in that form. If those chains shatter, he may not remember you. He may not remember anything but the rage and pain Morrigan has fed him for months. You could be freeing a monster who sees you as just another enemy." The Lin thought of ice blue eyes that had softened at her touch, of a massive paw covering her hand in comfort, of a voice that had tried to sing along with her lullabies. "Then I'll remind him," she said simply. Caspian nodded, respect flickering in his dark eyes. "God help you both," he murmured, then disappeared back into the darkness. Tomorrow, everything would change. The blood moon hung like a crimson eye above Ironhold Fortress, casting everything in shades of violence and shadow. In the depths of the dungeons, the very stones seemed to pulse with malevolent energy as Lord Morrigan descended the stairs, flanked by 3 dark priests whose faces were hidden beneath bone-white masks. Candles flickered to life without flame, their black wax dripping like tears as the priests arranged themselves in a triangle around Alaric's cell. The wolf lay motionless, weakened from days of Morrigan's enhanced torture, but his ice-blue eyes tracked every movement with lethal awareness. "Tonight, my dear Alaric," Morrigan purred, raising his hands as dark magic began to coalesce around his pale fingers, "your pathetic existence finally ends. No more chances for rescue. No more hope." The ritual began with words in a language that predated human civilization, syllables that made the air itself recoil in disgust. Purple lightning crackled from Morrigan's fingertips into the cursed chains, which flared to life with such intensity that Alaric's scream of agony echoed through the entire fortress. 3 cells away, Thalen's eyes snapped open. The key Caspian had given her bit into her palm as she fumbled with the lock, her hands shaking as Alaric's cries of pain tore through her soul. The metal clicked, and she burst from her cell into the corridor. "Stop her!" Morrigan barked without breaking his chant. Guards materialized from the shadows, reaching for the Lin as she ran toward the ritual chamber. The roar that erupted from Alaric shook the very foundations of the fortress. Even half-dead, even burning alive in cursed chains, his fury at seeing the Lin threatened was volcanic. The sound was so primal, so filled with protective rage, that cracks appeared in the purple chains binding him. The guards stumbled backward, terror overriding their orders. The Lin threw herself through the doorway just as Morrigan raised his hands for the killing stroke. "Foolish girl," he sneered, pausing his ritual to savor her horror. "Your compassion means nothing. He is a beast. He is a monster. He is a king." Thalen's voice rang out with such fierce conviction that the dark priests faltered in their chanting. "And he is more human than you will ever be." Without hesitation, she dove toward Alaric's prone form, throwing herself across his massive body just as Morrigan's killing magic lanced toward them. The cursed energy struck her instead, pain beyond description flooding through her veins, but she held on, shielding him with her own flesh. "You saved me," she whispered against his bloodied fur, tears streaming down her face to fall onto the chains that bound him. "Now let me save you." Where her tears touched the cursed metal, something impossible began to happen. The purple glow flickered, dimmed, then began to crack like breaking glass. Morrigan's eyes widened in disbelief. No. This cannot be. But it was. Love, genuine and freely given, was the one force his dark magic had never been able to overcome. Where Thalin's tears touched the cursed metal, light began to bloom, not the sickly purple of dark magic, but pure, silver radiance that seemed to emanate from the very essence of love itself. The chains began to vibrate, their ancient bindings straining against a force they had never been designed to withstand. Impossible, Morrigan snarled, pouring more dark energy into the ritual. No mere emotion can break blood-forged chains. But the cracks were spreading, racing along the cursed metal like veins of liquid starlight. The purple glow flickered, dimmed, then began to fracture like breaking glass. The sound that emerged was hauntingly beautiful, like crystal bells chiming in harmony with something far greater than magic. Love, the Lin whispered against Alaric's fur. It was always about love. The chains exploded. Purple lightning erupted in all directions, shattering stone, sending the dark priests flying like broken dolls. The very air screamed as centuries of accumulated malice and pain were released in a single, cataclysmic moment. Morrigan's scream joined the chaos as his connection to the curse was severed, dark magic backlashing through his body like acid in his veins. Blinding light filled the dungeon, silver and gold and something beyond color, beyond description. When it finally faded, silence fell like a benediction. The Lin blinked away the afterimages, her vision slowly clearing. Where Alaric the wolf had lain broken and bleeding, a man now knelt before her. He was magnificent. Tall and powerfully built, with silver-white hair that caught the torchlight like spun moonbeams. His skin bore the faded scars of his imprisonment, but they only served to emphasize the regal bearing that no amount of suffering had been able to destroy. And his eyes, those same ice-blue depths she had come to love, now gazed at her from a distinctly human face carved from strength and nobility. Lightning still danced across his skin, crackling between his fingers as his true power awakened after months of suppression. You. His voice was rough from disuse, but rich and deep as distant thunder. The first words he had spoken in 5 years. You saved me. The Lin could only stare, overwhelmed by the transformation. This was Alaric Ashford, not just the wolf she had tended, but the Alpha King in all his terrible glory. Then those piercing eyes shifted past her to where Morrigan struggled to rise, dark magic still smoking around his burned hands. When Alaric spoke again, his voice carried the weight of ancient authority and promise of retribution. And you. He rose to his full height, power radiating from him in waves that made the very stones tremble. You will pay. Morrigan's face twisted with rage and fear as he raised his hands, calling upon every scrap of dark magic he could summon. You think this changes anything? I am still a king. I still have armies. You were never a king, Alaric replied, lightning beginning to build around his clenched fists. You were always just a thief. The battle for the kingdom began. Dark magic collided with pure lightning in an explosion that sent cracks racing up the dungeon walls. Morrigan launched himself backward, his robes billowing as he unleashed tendrils of shadow that writhed like living serpents toward Alaric. But the Alpha King was no longer the weakened prisoner who had languished in chains. He was fury given form, power unleashed, and 8 months of suffering transformed into devastating purpose. Alaric's hand sliced through the air, and the shadow tendrils disintegrated into harmless smoke. Is that all you learned in my throne, pretender? His voice carried centuries of royal authority. Parlor tricks and stolen power? I am more powerful than you ever were. Morrigan screamed, his composure finally cracking. Dark energy poured from his hands, coalescing into a spear of pure malice aimed directly at Alaric's heart. The Alpha King didn't dodge. He caught the spear in his bare hand, lightning crawling up its length until it shattered. You ruled through fear. Through chains and curses and the breaking of wills. He advanced, each step deliberate, inexorable. But you never understood true power. Morrigan stumbled backward until his spine hit the cell bars. What could you possibly know that I don't? Alaric's eyes flickered to where the Lin knelt, watching with tears still streaming down her face. That the strongest magic in any world is the choice to care for someone when the entire world tells you they're not worth saving. Lightning erupted from Alaric's hands in a blinding cascade. Morrigan's scream was cut short as the Alpha King's power, no longer drained, no longer suppressed, slammed into him with the force of a thunderstorm. When the light cleared, the usurper lay crumpled against the wall, alive but utterly defeated, his dark magic shattered beyond repair. In that moment, across the entire kingdom, every werewolf pack felt the shift in power like an earthquake in their souls. From the Silverwood forests to the mountain territories, from the coastal clans to the desert runners, wolves lifted their heads to the blood moon and howled. The sound was primal, joyous, defiant, a declaration that their true king had returned. The howling echoed through the fortress walls, through the dungeons, through the very stones of Ironhold. Guards and prisoners alike froze, recognizing the sound for what it was, the end of one age and the beginning of another. But Alaric barely heard them. His eyes were fixed on the Lynn, still kneeling where she had thrown herself over him, her simple dress torn and bloodied, her face streaked with tears and dirt, and yet more beautiful to him than any crown or throne. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides and did something that would be spoken of in legend for generations to come. The Alpha King fell to one knee before a servant girl. The Lynn Thorn, his voice was soft now, stripped of thunder and fury, holding only raw honesty. You showed me compassion when the world showed me only cruelty. You saw me when everyone else saw a monster. You tended my wounds, sang me songs, shared your dreams with a creature everyone told you was a demon. His hand reached up to gently cup her face. You freed me not with magic or strength, but with a kindness I thought no longer existed in this world. Alaric, she whispered, overwhelmed by the intensity of his gaze, by the impossible reality of this moment. I am a king, he continued, his thumb brushing away her tears. I have duties to my people, a kingdom to reclaim, a throne that awaits me. But I am also a man who owes you everything. He took both her hands in his. Not as a servant to a master. Not as a subject to a ruler. But as an equal. His voice dropped to something between a plea and a promise. As my mate. As my queen. Thalin's breath caught. She looked at this man, this king, who knelt before her with such vulnerability, such genuine reverence. I didn't save you because you were a king, she said finally, her voice steady despite the tears. I saved you because you deserved to be saved. Because when I looked into your eyes, I saw someone worth fighting for. Then fight with me now, Alaric replied. Help me build a kingdom where chains, whether iron or judgment, no longer define worth. Where humans and wolves can coexist not in fear, but in understanding. His grip on her hands tightened. Choose me not because I command it, but because you want to. And there it was, the freedom she'd been seeking all along. Not freedom from captivity, but freedom of choice. The power to decide her own destiny. Yes, the Lynn breathed. Yes, I choose you. I choose this. Alaric rose, bringing her with him, and when he kissed her, the remaining darkness in the dungeon seemed to flee before the light of what they had built together, hope, trust, and love that had conquered the darkest magic. Behind them, Caspian Greymantle stepped forward from where he'd been watching, his weathered face transformed by the ghost of a smile. He knelt, his fist over his heart. My sword is yours, my king. And my loyalty to you both. From her distant cell, Nessa Emberfell's laughter rang out, knowing, delighted, vindicated. I told you, didn't I, child? Compassion is the most powerful magic of all. As Alaric and the Lynn ascended the dungeon stairs together, the blood moon began to fade, giving way to the first rays of dawn. They emerged into the fortress courtyard where soldiers and servants had gathered, drawn by the howling and the magic that had shaken the very foundations of their world. Alaric stood before them, silver hair catching the rising sun, the Lynn at his side, no longer a prisoner, but a queen. The old reign of fear and separation ends today, he declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtyard. We will rebuild. Together. And in a small cottage on the outskirts of the kingdom, a young woman named Lyra sat up in bed for the first time in months, fever finally broken, her body healed by the magic released when her sister's love shattered an ancient curse. She looked toward Ironhold Fortress in the distance and smiled, somehow knowing that the Lynn was no longer a servant struggling to survive. She was a queen. And she was finally, truly free. If this pack story found you, I want to know, what part of the world are you listening from? Let me see how far this pack reaches. These stories don't end here. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in the shadows.